What is up, my people? John Morris here, johnmorrisonline.com. Welcome back to another episode of the John Morris Show. This one, we're going to be continuing with our little e-commerce script. In this lesson, it'll be a snippet of lesson number 3. And in it, we're going to focus primarily on a GetResults method in our database class. And I'm going to be showing you how to create a get method where you can get multiple rows. We're going to be doing with prepared statements, and you can have any number of parameters in your query for your prepared statement and still be able to handle it. It's a little bit trickier of a thing to do if you haven't done it before because of the way prepared statements work. So I'm going to show you how to do that in this lesson, and that's going to be in conjunction with building that so that we can build some functions that allow us to then be able to get the different things that we need for the template that we're building. So we can get a list of products, we can get an individual product, we can get an admin page, the content for that. We'll get to the point where instead of having just template files that say single and home like we had in the last lesson, we'll actually be grabbing the data, and we'll be set up then to where we can use that data to start actually building our front end pages. So we'll have really a lot of the back end stuff done at this point and really be moving towards, in the future videos, the front end type stuff. So you want to learn prepared statements, you want to learn this trickier little nuance of building a method in a GetResults method in your database class, figure out how to do that, all of that, as well as further setting up our template files, and you want to check out this video. That said, let's dive in. So the main part of this is actually in our db.php file, and it's this GetResults method. So what this GetResults method does is it actually queries our database using prepared statements for a particular thing that we happen to be looking for. So in the case of a SKU number, it'll query the database, it'll query the products table for that SKU and see if it exists, and if it does, it will pull that data, and then we're printing it on our template. We're printing it out on our template file. So if we go to home, we'll talk about this function in a second, which actually uses the database method we're talking about, but you can see we're doing a print R right here. Same with, if we go to a page, we're doing print R. If we go to the home page, we're doing a print R up here. If we go to a single page, we're doing a print R. So it's just printing out the data right now. So the big question then is, what does this method do? So I'm going to talk through this a little bit. I honestly, again, you have access, if you have access to the code, if you're a member of the PHP 101 course, you have access to this code. You can really just kind of use it as is, but I do want to explain what's going on here so you can tweak this and use this as you want. So again, as I mentioned, we're using prepared statements. The first thing we do is we actually prepare the statement. Now let me show you an example of the query. So again, you'll see here our GetResults method has 2 parameters. It has the query, and then it has some arguments that we pass into it. So if we go to where we actually call GetResults right here, the first thing we're passing in is our query. And our query is a parameterized query, meaning instead of actually putting the data, like the SKU number, directly into the query, we're putting in a question mark, which is a placeholder that we're then going to bind values to. Okay, and the value that we're going to bind to it, that we're specifying in this next element that we're passing in, or next parameter, which is our arguments parameter. Now, you can do this any way that you really want, but you have to do it a way. And so when you are working with prepared statements and you are specifying the values that you want to insert into the place of these placeholders when you actually run the query. So again, in this case, our SKU number. You also have to specify the type of data it is. So an integer, a string, a double, a float. You have to specify what it is so that PHP can check it, right? If you're saying it's supposed to be an integer and it's a string, then that's not correct, and so PHP isn't going to run the query. So you have to specify that. Now, you could do this as a separate parameter. You could maybe flip these and do the the type first and then the SKU second in this element. This is just the way I've decided to do it. So again, you could do it any way, but you need to do it a way. So what we end up here with this array is we'll have our SKU number that's being passed in from our get product up here. It's being passed in as a parameter of this function. So this would be our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which we are grabbing from the URL. Remember, on our index page, we do all of this get page identifier from URL in order to get the SKU number that we can pass in here. Okay, so we're grabbing it from the URL, and then we're ultimately passing it into this function, and then we're passing it again into our class method and our database class to be able to run our query. So again, this is how this is set up, and then as a result of that, that determines what we need to do in order to format it properly so we can then run our actual prepared statement. So before we get into how we do all that, I just want to show you BindPerAM real quick. So this is the BindPerAM method for MySQLi, and this is of course built into PHP. And you can see what it takes is it takes a string of types, and then it takes a series of variables that represent the values for the placeholders. So again, if you're not familiar with this, I have other videos in my PHP 101 course that go through all of this and explain this. There's also probably videos out on YouTube and so forth that would explain prepared statements. But essentially, for every placeholder you put in here, because remember, we can do select all from products where product SKU equals question mark, and product and name equals question mark, and price equals question mark. We could have like 5 question marks placeholders in here, right? Or we could have 3, or we could have 2. So again, for every single one of those you put in your query, based on what your query is and what you're going to be looking for, you need to specify the value that goes in that placeholder and the type of data it's supposed to be. And the way this works is essentially the first element in this array is going to go for the first placeholder. The second element in the array would go for the second placeholder if you had one. So it's in order. So you have to match up the order. And that's the exact same way that BindPerAM works. So if we come down here and look at an example, BindPerAM, we have this string which specifies, this is how you have to pass this into BindPerAM. This specifies the different types for the data we're passing in, and this first S references this code variable and says this is supposed to be a string. This references the second variable, language, and says it's supposed to be a string. This third one references the third variable, if I can select it here. This references the third variable, official, which says it's supposed to be a string. And then the fourth one references the fourth variable, percent, and says it's supposed to be a double. So again, it's just in order. If we flipped language here and put language first and code second, the PHP would not know to flip these two right here, over here. It wouldn't know that. And also up here in our query where we're putting in our question marks, you see we have 4 question marks, we have 4 type designations, and we have 4 variables. They're all just in order. If we flipped language and code, it would put language at the first spot and code at the second spot. It wouldn't know to switch them. I kind of am hammering that point home because it's different with PDO. With MySQLi, you use anonymous placeholders here. Whereas with PDO, you can actually use named parameters. So you, instead of putting a question mark, you actually put, I think it's a colon, and the name of the variable it references. So when you do your bind statements, you don't have to necessarily put them in order because you've specified the name here. So it knows what you're referencing. That's not true for MySQLi. It's in order. So whatever order these are in, these need to be in the same order, and your variables need to be in the same order. I go through all of that because that determines the code we're going to have to write to transform this array that we've created here into something we can use for this bind parameter statement. Right? That's what all the first part of this code is designed to do. So if you understand the big picture now, hopefully it'll make the code make a little bit more sense. So the first thing that we do is we pass our query to the prepare statement in MySQLi. This just basically gets it ready to be able to bind parameters to it. You have to prepare the statement before you can bind parameters to it. So that's what we're doing here. We're wrapping it in an if statement because we have to do this. So if we can't, for some reason this fails, we can't go on. So we just wrap the whole thing in an if statement. Then what we're doing is we're looping through our arguments array, which again, I'm going to kind of hammer this, but it's this array right here. This is our args array. So we're going to loop through this, and we're going to work with both. Remember, it could be a little bit confusing because the actual value that we want to put in here is going to be our key in this array, and then the value of this array is going to be our actual type designator. So it's maybe a little backwards, maybe a little confusing, but that's what's going on here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab all of those types. We're going to loop, as we're looping through, we're going to be creating a string of types. So when this for each loop is done, this types variable, if we echoed it out, it would look something similar to this. Of course, it would only have the type designators that we specified in our array here, but it would be a string that looks like this, okay? Then our values, right? This is our SKU numbers in this case that we're passing in. We're going to put that and create an array of those. So this will be an indexed array, and there will be however many elements you specify here. It'll be that's how many elements will be in this array, and each one will be the value that's passed in. So again, we're just taking those and essentially putting them into their own separate array. So when we get done, what we'll have is this types variable, which is a string of the type identifiers, and now we'll have an array of the individual values that we're going to be querying for. All right, next then, it'd be nice if this wasn't necessary, but essentially because we're using call UserFunc array, we have to pass, and we're doing it into the BindParameter method in MySQLi. This is expecting these values to be passed by reference instead of by value. Essentially, the difference is that when you pass something in by reference using call UserFunc array, the method you're passing it into can modify it, whereas if you pass it in by value, that method can't, and BindPerAM needs to be able to modify it. So that's why we need to pass these in as references so that this will work. Otherwise, you'll get an error that essentially says BindPerAM expects these to be passed in, or maybe it's called UserFunc expects them to be passed in as references and their values, and it won't work. Okay, so that's what this does. It just essentially, you can see it's looping through our values array and then just essentially modifying. Again, we're using our values array right here, modifying it so that these are now references as opposed to values. Again, like I said, it'd be nice if this weren't necessary. It seems a little superfluous, but however you say the word, superfluous, but it's something we have to do right now. Next, what we're doing is we're casting our types string that we created up here into an array. So we're turning it into an array with one element, and the value of that one element will be this SSD here. So if I just print R and do types, so you can see this. Let's go back to our page here. You can see it's now instead of being a string, has one. It's an indexed array. It has one element, and that element is what the string was before. So it essentially turns that string into just an array with one element in it. Now, this wouldn't be if we had, I just want to make this clear, if we had more than one type identifier, if we were passing in more than one parameter, this wouldn't add, holy cow, this would not add, let's just go ahead and refresh this. It wouldn't add each type identifier as another element in the array. It would just be this string would have an S, right? So it'd be IS. It'd still be one element. So one would be the 0 element. It would be IS. So if it had 4, it'd be SSSD. Okay, so I want to make that clear. And then the next thing that we're doing is we're taking our types array that we just created and our values array that we created earlier, and we're merging them. And the reason we're doing that is because of the way call UserFunc array works. So essentially, the way call UserFunc array works is we're going to tell it that we want to call the function. So call UserFunc, what it's going to do is it's going to call a particular function, and then it's going to pass in the parameters that we specify. And so we have to do this because, again, BindParameter doesn't take for when we pass in this data, these type designations and these variables, you can't pass in an array of these variables. It doesn't accept an array of variables. So we have to pass them in as individual variables like this. However, the data that we're working with is actually an array of data. So I've just decided to do it this way. That we could probably list it out and turn them all into variables and do it that way, but I've just decided to do it this way. And so essentially, when you call UserFunc array, what it's going to do is you're going to tell it that we want to call this method right here, this BindPerAM method, off of our statement object. That's what this part is. This is saying call this method, and then it's saying and pass in these this array as a series of variables. So let me go ahead and let's just print out this params real quick. Print our params so you can see what that array looks like. So it is an array that has our type designations in the first element, and then it has our actual data in the second element. And if we had more data, more that we were querying for, right? So again, we're just doing SKU equals and placeholder. But if we were doing where SKU equals and then where name equals, and we had a question mark, if we had multiple placeholders, therefore we had multiple elements in this array would be, the type designations would be, S, 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 D, but then after that, the first element would be the first the first element, the first value in this array, so would be the SKU number. Then we'd have another element, we'd have a 2, that would be the next value. So if we were querying for the name, it would be the value of name that we passed in. And so this could end up being an array with, say, 5 elements in it. Okay, that's the type of array that call UserFunc needs. And so what it does is what call UserFunc does is it essentially takes each one of these elements, however many elements are in this array, and it turns them into, so to speak, the variables. And so essentially what we have, what happens is when we do call UserFunc array right here, and we pass in the array of parameters, it essentially, and I'm simplifying this, but it essentially turns the first element in that array into this first variable here, the second element into the second one, this third one to this third. It essentially formats it the way that BindPerAM needs it so that it can actually use it. And so that allows us to essentially, what this does, and the reason we need to do that this way is because with the way that you have to specify type designations and variables for prepared statements, if you are writing a database function like this where you don't know, right, you could be querying for 3 data points or 5 data points. There could be, two placeholders. There could be 7 placeholders. You don't know what you're going to get. You have to be able to process that query no matter how many you get, whether it's 1 or it's 10. You need to be able to process all of those. All of this essentially handles that, so no matter how many placeholders, how many parameters you pass in order that you're going to query for, it can handle it, and it can still run this BindPerAM method and use our prepared statements. And so that makes this a very versatile query, and you're going to see this becomes the foundation of several different queries that we're going to do. Okay, so that's the bulk of what this does. Once this actually, we do this call UserFunc array here in the bind parameter, we now have our parameters bound to our prepared statement. So we have it so that at this point, our SKU number is now in place of this question mark here in our query. So when we go to execute the query, we have the actual value that we're querying for, not a question mark in our query. It's not exactly how it works because of the way that prepared statements work and the way they pass the data back and forth between MySQL. It doesn't actually necessarily just put the value in the query and then run the query. It's a little bit different communication, but that's the basic idea. Like, we don't really necessarily at this point need to get into exactly how all of that works. It's kind of a rabbit hole. So again, just understand that essentially what it leads to is you have this SKU number that's now been checked, right? It's been run through the process to make sure that there's no injection attacks can occur. It's now put in place here, and our data is clean, and we can run our query without having to worry about SQL injection attacks and so forth. All right, so once we have that, then we just execute the statement, right? We run it, we do run the query, and then we want the result. So we use the GetResult method of MySQLi on our statement variable here. And then what this is going to give us actually is just a MySQL resource. This doesn't actually give us the results set, okay? And that's something that's important to understand, because I've had this question before where they're like, well, I run GetResult after that and it gives me some weird thing. It doesn't actually give me the result set. What this does is it gives you the MySQL reference, and then what you have to do is you have to run fetch object or fetch or fetch array, and then like you have to actually go and fetch the object from the result set. So this is what this is basically telling PHP is, okay, here's where you can get the result set, right? We've created the MySQL, and I'm simplifying again, but MySQL essentially says, I've created a result set based on your query. Here's where you can go get it. This is the reference for you to go get it. And then you have to go get it. You have to fetch it with PHP, and that's what fetch object does. Now, when you're working, if this were get result, right? If it were like get row, you could just run fetch object without this while loop, because there's only going to be one row, right? And so we can just fetch that row and pull it. But with get results, where we could, on our homepage, we're getting multiple products here. We have multiple rows that we're grabbing. We need to run this while loop. And so essentially what we do is we run a while loop, and we run result fetch object here to fetch. We're going to go through the resource. We're going to fetch the first row, and we're going to set that equal to this row variable. And then we're going to create this results array. These question marks make this so that these results basically are I can never say that word. They're basically concatenated, or however you say that, into this array. So essentially we're going to loop through this resource, and we're going to fetch the first row, and we're going to store that row into the results array as the first element. Then we're going to see if there's another row. If there's another row, we're going to fetch that as an object, and we're going to store that into our results array as the second element. And then we're going to do it again, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, however many rows are there for the query that we just run. We're going to grab all of them, and we're going to store them into this results array as an array of objects. Now, if you're more comfortable working with associative arrays, you can fetch this as an array and then specify that you want an associative array or an indexed array, whatever you want. I prefer working with objects, so that's what I've done here. You could even, if you really wanted to, modify this get results method and add a third parameter that's, say, output type, and then that would allow you to specify when you actually run this func method if you want an object, an associative array, an indexed array, so forth. I didn't feel that was necessary for me because, and for this, because we're just going to get an array of objects and it'll be fine. It'll be what we'll work with. But if you do want to change that, feel free to do that. So now what we have at this point is we have an array of results based on our query. It could be 1 row, it could be 100 rows. It depends what we've queried for and what gets returned by our database. But now from this method, all we do is just return whatever we got back from it. Okay, so this is the main thing that we've done here. This is the foundation. This is the database method that allows us to then run the different queries that we need to run. So if we come over here now to our functions file, you can see that we have, all right, that'll do it for this little snippet. Obviously in the full tutorial video, there's a number of other things that we go through in this lesson, but that should give you the gist of both the GetResults method as well as how we use that to build functions to help us set up our templates. If you would like the source code for this, if you'd like access to the full tutorial video along with all the other tutorial videos, as well as access to my PHP 101 course, my bonus interview with Michael Phoenix on how to actually get work doing this kind of thing, all of that is available as a part of my PHP 101 course, and right now you can get it for $10 off the normal price at johnmorrisonline.com/deal. So if you'd like to do that, head on over there. Otherwise, thanks for watching the video. Be sure to hit the like button if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll talk to you next time.